Welcome to This Day. My name is Andrew Mwansa. Coming up on the program tonight, I start with Mporokoso Member of Parliament, Honorable Mundubile. He argues that the former ruling party, the Patriotic Front, still have so much to offer. He also further on argues that the way things are under the Upnd are much more graver than they were under the Patriotic Front. He argues that his government, the Patriotic Front, built massive infrastructure under which the Upnd now are enjoying the employment of 30,000 teachers and 11,000 health workers. I start with him on This Day. Mporokoso Member of Parliament, Honorable Mundubile, thank you so much for joining us on This Day.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start off with the burning issues in the country. And the biggest issue in the country currently is the fight against corruption. We did see what happened to the Anti-Corruption Commission DG. He was forced to resign. Then thereafter, the president did get to dissolve the board. But also after that, we've seen that there's a lot of revelations that have come out of what's been happening at the Anti-Corruption Commission. What is your position as a senior member of Parliament, but also as a member of the biggest opposition political party?
Yes, thank you very much. For us as PF, and especially the members of Parliament, we are not surprised with that has come out now. I'll take you back. If I take you back to around about 2022, we brought issues on the floor of the House, starting with procurement under Ministry of Agriculture, procurement under Ministry of Health. You remember that we actually intervened in some procurement involving $100 million, where there were issues to do with government officials soliciting for bribes, as it were, and many other cases that we brought to the fore. We put those questions on the floor of the House to our Honour the Vice President. And as usual, the responses were that they were a government of angels, unlike the PF. So what we have seen is just a tip on the iceberg. You know that a number of people have taken dossiers to SEC. I have in mind Kasonde Mwenda, Emmanuel Mwamba, among others. So what became very clear was that there was an invisible hand that was controlling SEC. When we were told that SEC, under statutory instrument 1123, was placed under State House, among its other institutions, we raised issues. And we felt that the real fight against corruption was going to be negatively affected if that was the case. The refusal by the president to declare his assets showed that he was not really committed to the fight against corruption. Now, I'll be very quick to mention that in as much as the law does not provide, morally, him being the commander, being the head of state, championing a fight against corruption, it would have been a very good gesture and instructive to all his appointees if he had started by declaring his assets. Yeah, so to answer your question, I want to say that we are not surprised. We expected this to come one day because there are many other issues. Now we're only talking about, I think so far, we've only talked about Ministry of Health.
Yep.
But remember that on the floor of the House, we raised questions about consent orders that were coming from state chambers. This is when cadres will just spring up, and the next thing you hear, they've been awarded compensation of 500,000, 1 million, 6 million. These issues are all there, and I would want us to start from there. So there is really nothing new with what has happened now. The consent order that Professor O'Brien Kaba referred to, we had raised those issues on the floor of the House. And especially that the manner in which they were awarded and to who they were awarded, it became very clear that it was just a scheme There are many other people that have had a civil claim before state chambers for many years. They remain unpaid. But the recent consent orders or the recent claims will be quickly processed through consent orders and paid. So from there, I don't have to be a rocket scientist to know what is going on. Yeah, so Professor O'Brien Kaba remains a hero. That is the hero of our country today, because he was now speaking from inside. Those of us that raised issues from outside, were ignored and left on the wayside. But I'm very happy that it took one courageous, patriotic Zambian in the name of Professor O'Brien Kaba, who came out. So this time around, the fact that he was a commissioner at the SEC and he was speaking as an authority, he could not be ignored. Yeah, but the matters that he raised are matters that we had been raising on the floor of the House. So we expect...
Are you happy with the decisiveness that the president has put to this fight against corruption? For example, when we had Dr. Kaba in that moment was speaking as an academician. He wasn't speaking in his authority as commissioner of the SEC, but like you said, because he's an authority, that's the reason for why he wasn't avoided. Do you think there's been decisiveness from the president to fight this corruption? And I say this because we've seen on a number of times he's fired his DCs, he's fired his PSAs, those that have been found erring, but also we've seen him taking a decisive action to force the DG of the SEC to resign, but also he's moved on again to dissolve this board. Do you see decisiveness in his fight against corruption?
Not at all. Had it not been for O'Brien Kaba, those people who have been occupying the offices, the question that begs, did the president know about all these corruption allegations? The answer is yes. Because today...
How do we qualify that?
I'll tell you that we are aware that there is not less than 4 members of his cabinet that are appearing before SEC, and everything has been kept under wraps. If I take you back, when President Hakainde Hichilema was in opposition, he objected to some of the cabinet ministers who were facing corruption charges to continue in office. He came out categorical in saying, how do you expect the investigations to proceed smoothly when the suspects are flying flags? That was his position. He said the moment a person has been mentioned, is a suspect appearing before the anti-corruption or before any criminal court, he must resign. No, he said he must be fired. He actually said he must be fired. So have we seen the president take any such decisive action? Let me just take you back for you to see the inconsistencies in his actions, so that I qualify my answer as to why I think he's not been decisive. There were allegations leveled against the former minister for Luapula, Chilundika. There's just an audio.
Yeah.
The president was very quick to relieve him. And there was an issue to, well, we don't know what really happened to Honorable Kasanda. From there, which other minister has been fired? We're talking about, that audio was basically talking about UPND cadres fighting over some mine, Sujilite and whatever it was. From there, there's been serious allegations. The people that have sent letters alleging corruption on the part of his cabinet ministers. Nothing has happened. So we have information that a number of ministers are actually appearing before SEC, and some of them have actually been charged. But the information is being kept under wraps. When the ministers under Edgar Chagwalungu were going to SEC, you all knew. It was all over TV, it was all over the newspapers. What has happened to the name and shame? So the manner in which the president is conducting these affairs is raising questions. Because clearly, if this is a champion who is out there to fight corruption, Why is he uncomfortable to name and shame those that have been named? Why is he failing to fire them? Why is he going behind to negotiate with them, to move them from one ministry to the other? These are the questions that Zambians are asking. So there's been no decisiveness on the part of the president.
From where you're seated, what would you say is the reason for why the president has still kept some of these ministers who have been accused of corruption, some of these aides that have been accused of corruption? What possibly would be the reason for why he decided to keep them, according to where he's sitting?
Well, first of all, I think your guess will be as good as mine. We're allowed to speculate. Because if the president detested corruption, if the president was fighting corruption, the first steps to take would be to remove those who are involved in corruption and still sitting in his cabinet. And when he doesn't remove them, we therefore should not believe that he's actively fighting corruption. Yes.
Others have gone to extents of accusing the president of being involved in these corrupt practices. That's the reason for why he's not taking decisive action of not firing these individuals?
Like I said, people are at liberty to speculate because really we are all wondering why is it difficult? It was so easy to fire Chilundika. It was so easy to fire Kasanda. Why should it be difficult to fire these others if they're found erring? Yes.
Where does this put the Anti-Corruption Commission in terms of its capacity to fight present, future and past corruption?
Well, the revelations by State Counsel Musa Mwenye make very interesting reading. In part, he says a very strong board was put in place and the user-friendly management team was also appointed. If you read through, you'll see between the lines that there's been a problem from the word go. That the board really wanted to ensure that the Anti-Corruption Commission performed according to their mandate. And there was an invisible hand that made it difficult for that to happen. So even the dissolution of the board now, the resignation of the DG does not help matters. Because it means we will go back to the original position where another board will be put in place and the user-friendly management. There is need for a strong political will. There is need for honesty and sincerity on the part of the president to start with. The buck stops at him. All these people who are being accused are his appointees. So the buck stops at him. So we believe the president is entertaining corruption in his government. And we are correct to say so. Because why is he failing to part company with those that have been cited for corruption?
Do you feel vindicated, Honorable Mundubile, when 12 months ago you spoke that the fight against corruption is vindictive, the fight against corruption is targeted against those that served in the previous administration? With these revelations coming from Musa Mwenye?
Yes, no, we feel vindicated. You see, like I've always said, what the Upnd government managed to do successfully was to put up some propaganda machinery where the citizens of Zambia began to look at members of the Patriotic Front or all those who are sympathetic to the PF in a different light. And they also narrowed the definition of corruption. They made Zambians believe that owning a house in Kabulonga, in Ibexhill, was corruption, because they came up, with all these allegations against those that served in the past regime. My argument, and I'm very forceful in my argument, corruption should be looked at in a broader aspect. It actually involves policy. It involves legislation and administration. Today, we have information. It was all over, it was in public domain, that a mining house had illegally transferred $2.5 billion without taking to the board, whereas the CCMIH was a member. That money was transferred out of this country. This is before the Upnd government came in. Decisive action was taken. The matter was reported to the police. The directors were actually arrested and put in custody, and the case was ongoing. The Upnd came in and withdrew that matter. So we just stopped there, Mr. Mansa. We are right now going through so much as a result of bad decisions, bad policies, drought, name it. But we have a minister who single-handedly makes a decision, that is if he was alone, to forgive these people who had clearly stolen money which was properly earned. So there, if you want to look at the broader definition of corruption, you begin to start questioning. Did the minister act in the best interest of the Zambian people or private capital? For as long as the action favored private interests, that is defined as corruption. We recently were told that there was some money owed by some mining house again of $1 billion to ZRA. That debt was forgiven and only $23 million is to be paid. Now these are very few individuals making these decisions, not even coming to Parliament for representatives to debate. What I'm trying to put in context is that whilst they are keeping the cameras busy looking at plots in Ibex Hill, empty plots, houses, flats in New Kasama and so on, the real corruption is happening. You're talking about $2.5 billion. How do you forgive people that have stolen that kind of money? There's been no information whatsoever other than that the case was withdrawn. The CCMIH had interest in that particular mining house, over 20% thereabout. The shares were diluted. They no longer hold any shares in that particular. So you begin to question these decisions. What motivated the minister to make these decisions? So let's take another example, the dual carriageway, Mendola dual carriageway. You know that National Fund Agency worked with NAPSA and Workman Compensate with NAPSA to do the Chingola Solwezi Road. NAPSA funded that project, and through the tolls, the National Road Fund Agency started paying NAPSA. It's the same principle that has happened before. The Kitwe Chingola. How were these roads funded? They were funded through NAPSA, working with the National Road Fund Agency. So today, you have a consortium that comes and gives you the same proposal to say they'll get money from NAPSA, employ contractors. After they've done the job, then this consortium will collect tolls for 25 years. Is that decision in public interest or private interest? But in the meantime, using their propaganda machinery, they convinced the Zambian people that PF wanted to contract this road at $1.2 billion. Yes, correct.
Which contractor did you want to use?
China Jiangxi.
Why didn't you use NAPSA as well to get money? And
No. The difference here is that China Jiangxi was coming in with the money, and the repayment period was 15 years. So if you look at the cash flows, the net cash flows that were going to come, had that been the case, compare it with our friends who are claiming they're going to do the road at $650–700 million.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that we are going to forego the revenue on the tolls, that forms part of the cost. Are we together? Because in the case of China Jiangxi, they just brought in the money, you continue collecting your tolls, and you're paying back in 15 years. But in this particular case now, the tolls are being collected by this consortium. So when you calculate, and I want Zambians to take interest, Find out how much tolls we collect per year on these roads and calculate, multiplied by 25 years. You find that the cost of that road is over $3 billion. $3 billion. Are we together?
Those are interesting revelations that you're giving us. But also, on top of these revelations, last week we did see the Financial Intelligence Center, revealing the financial, trends that have been happening in the country in terms of the financial crimes, suspicious financial, crimes. There's been an increase of about 133% compared to 2022, from 5.38 billion to about 13.85 billion. This obviously, indicates that increase of about 133%. I would like to get your position, in terms of these revelations coming out of the FIC.
Yes, it's when matters, when there's an invisible hand that interferes with the government system, everything goes wrong. In the previous report, we're talking about 5.3. That's a lot of money. That's basically more than 1 year's allocation of the Constituency Development Fund countrywide. Because CDF is only about 4.5. So you can imagine, in 2022 they reported 5.3. Have we heard of any investigations? There's been none. I don't believe that the entire 5.3 billion was cleared by the investigative wings, and they found no wrongdoing. My understanding of the operations of the FIC is that they report on suspicious transactions. What does that mean? If in your account, on a monthly basis, you receive between 20 and 50,000 for a very long time, a 30,000 deposit or transfer into your account is not a suspicious transaction. It's not an unusual transaction. If Diamond TV receives 1 million kwacha, between 1 and 2 million kwacha per month in their course of business, a transfer of 1.5 is not an unusual transaction. But when they receive 10 million, FIC picks it. They want to investigate because it has gone outside the usual band. So the 5.8, these are unusual transactions. We've not heard of any investigations.
Should the Zambian people be worried?
Zambian people should be worried. The only people who are busy going to court, the only people who are being investigated, who are going to police stations, to SEC, are those that were in the Patriotic Front. But remember, the PF came out of power, it's now 3 years. And yet, a lot of things have happened in between. So, the fact that nothing happened on the 5.3, the criminals became emboldened. They went further and did it 3 times more. Now we have 13.5 billion.
Are you confident in the works of the law enforcement agencies to be able to deal with these issues decisively?
Nothing is going to happen. Nothing is going to happen. When Statutory Instrument 1123 was issued, we expressed our worry. Yeah, because we know that President Hakainde Hichilema likes micromanaging things. We knew that was the end. Which investigative investigative agency is going to take up any matter from there?
Well,
because you see,
the President did speak that the investigative wings should take keen interest in these suspicious transactions.
The President said that, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, so that should be a source of worry. These are transactions that happened over a year ago, and nothing has happened. So if the President speaks now, what is he telling you? He's constructively admitting that he's the one that has a joystick. He says when they should move and when they shouldn't. He was admitting constructively that they've been unable to move because he didn't tell them to move. That's what he was saying. Because these figures were available. They were in public domain. The reports were in public domain. Why didn't the law enforcement agencies move? Did he have to take the President to say move for them to move? he was admitting that for them to move, he has to tell them to move. So they have not moved because he didn't tell them to move. And because he's the one to tell them to move, he will also tell them on who they should move and whom they should not move on. So there is no, I mean, the system is compromised.
Yeah.
What we are dealing with here is a paralysis of a government system. It's total paralysis of a government system. Whether you're talking about the importation of drugs, when you go through all this, you only realize one thing, that there's a complete paralysis of a governance system. Some of the mistakes that are being made are deliberate, and they're elementary, they're basic, because somebody has designed it like that. There's some benefit that is coming from there. Remember, our definition of corruption is that it's going to come through policies. There'll be some deliberate policies that will be set up so that somebody can benefit in a way. So President Upnd Hichilema's government has lamentably failed. They've failed, one, on account of incompetence. And they have failed, two, on account of grand corruption within his government. And they have failed, three, because of compromising the other arms of government. In a properly functioning democracy, a constitutional democracy like ours, we expected the courts to function independently, the legislature to function independently, but Upnd Hichilema has brought in a system through JCC where he has appointed members of his central committee under the Upnd to intimidate judges. So the independence of judges has been highly compromised because of the manner in which the system has been designed. You saw how the other judges were fired by the JCC. I mean, it should not be that easy to fire a judge. It should not be that easy to fire a judge. So the process has been so abbreviated, it has been so simplified that the judges now have to look over their shoulder. But remember, all this was designed. All this was designed. Intimidate the judges so that the judiciary is compromised.
Let's take our first break. When we're back, we continue with the program. Honorable Mundubile, you were saying that the judges are compromised. You're saying that the Upnd is using members of the Central Committee from within their party to intimidate judges, but also you're worried at how and of how easy it has become to remove a judge from practicing.
Yes, my point there is that if you have an independent judicial complaints commission,
we don't have one?
Look at the composition of today's JCC. Those are members of the Upnd. It's dominated by members of the Upnd. Members who were sitting in the Central Committee. When the names came for ratification, those are some of the comments that we had in the stakeholders' comments. Yeah, I mean, we had recourse to their CVs, and most of them were actually members of the Upnd. Of course, the decision was that they may have resigned, but the truth is that they're members of the party. So here is the situation. They will recommend, the president will recommend to them a name for a judge. How would that judge ever survive? So the first thing is that we needed an independent judicial complaints commission. We need an independent judiciary, because the moment the JCC is not independent, the judges, the judiciary is compromised, because then the individuals in the judiciary are intimidated, as it were. Yes.
Let's talk about the state of our democracy. You've been on record as the Patriotic Front, stating that our democratic credentials have really gone down, and that the UPND are not doing much to address issues that you are raising as members of the opposition, and generally issues that the Zambian people are raising. One of the critical issues that you are raising as MPs and as opposition political parties is that you're not given the freedom, to hold public rallies. But we saw recently the Citizens First were given permission to go ahead and hold their rally. The Socialist Party as well were given permission to hold their rally. And government has committed itself that from now onwards, everybody who wishes to go and have a public rally is going to have it.
So in short, they admitted that at the time, when we said our democratic space was shrinking, because for 3 years, you're only accounting for 2 rallies. How many political parties do we have? Even if we're to allocate 1 rally per political party, we are doing very badly. You have free citizens demonstrating against load shedding, for instance. What happens to them? What happened to their right to demonstrate, their right to associate, their rights to assemble? How many people today are in prison merely for speaking? In their usual style, the UPND came up and they abolished the law that related to the defamation of the president. But the cybercrime is what they're using, and the number of our youths are gracing the prisons today. How many times was Edgar Chagolungu insulted by UPND cadres, including President Upnd himself? Did we see anything close to what we are seeing now? So if you speak against President Upnd Hichilema, you face the full wrath of UPND cadres. Recently, the presidential aides to President Upnd Hichilema, this gentleman, what's his name again? Levin Goma, came out very clearly. If you stand in the way of President Upnd Hichilema, Tifianta. Now, what kind of democracy is that? President Upnd Hichilema is a Zambian. He's a president who should be accountable to the people of Zambia. Having a contrary view to what he believes in does not mean you should now be at the mercy of Levin Goma and his courts. This is a democracy. The president can be criticized. There should be enough space and freedom for citizens to stand up and challenge the president. The president was elected by the people of Zambia. He's accountable to the people of Zambia. But if the presidential aide now is saying, you, the voters who voted for him, if you ever question anything, Tikufyantani. And because of what happened recently to Honorable Member for Petauke Jeje Banda, Kufyanta is now interpreted in many ways. And the citizens are now scared. They are saying, oh, so the fact that JJ was abducted and some of the people that were mentioned are now saying Tifianta. So you can imagine what that does to the people of Zambia.
Many say and argue that in comparative times, the democracy under the UPND is far much better than the democracy that you gave the Zambian people when you were in power as the Patriotic Front.
I don't think so. I genuinely do not think so, and I don't think anybody can challenge me to that. How many times were they denied to hold rallies in a given space, for instance?
Well, the current president was not allowed to campaign in some of these areas. The cop about the time that President Isiwe was in Chipata, the president couldn't travel to Chipata because the president, was there. And there's several examples that we can highlight. Honorable Brand Mundubile, the time that President Upnd Hichilema was at Sun FM, you saw how he was bundled out of, of that media house. But also there are many examples of where his supporters escorted him to court, and in the process we did see how the police used live ammunition, and in the end 2 people died at that, at those instances.
Yes, firstly, let's start with the last example. The president was summoned to force headquarters. He came with 100 buses. Did anybody stop those buses? Did anybody stop those buses? The individuals accompanied the president. It was only after there was some unrest within that huge crowd that the confusion erupted. But they were allowed to escort him. Did you see anybody allowed to escort President Gachagua Lungu last week? Those are just comparisons.
And the justification was that we should avoid what happened not to reoccur again, because there could be confusion that would erupt and a life could be lost.
But if what happened was blamed on President Gachagua Lungu, why did you need to? Because the bad man there was President Gachagua Lungu, who gave instructions. Now that we have an angel in State House, why did we have to put police there?
We need to learn from our history.
No. Let's take an example of what happened in Mongo. Where the president began to drive side by side with the presidential motorcade. So sometimes, and I'm giving this example from experience, we had a situation when I was campaign manager in Chilubi, where President Hakainde Hichilema and the Upnd indicated they were coming to campaign in Chilubi. And they indicated we had, as political parties, agreed on the areas where to campaign, allocated areas and days. So when President Hakainde Hichilema heard that the president was coming to Chilubi, he changed and moved from the area where he should have been campaigning and wanted to come to the area where President Lungu was. And at that point, the police would not allow. Obviously, the police would not allow. Given the history of what happened in Mongu and other places. Yeah, so I think for one to say that there was the democracy under the PF, could not be compared to what we're experiencing now, or rather that there's more democracy now, so to speak, than there was under the PF, is not true. That's highly inaccurate. That's highly inaccurate. Yeah.
The president was quoted by the Diggers newspaper that the corruption that the country is currently facing is systematic, and that it's not possible to root out this corruption within 2 years and 11 months.
There you go. There you go. The language has changed. Why has the language changed? Why has the president changed his language insofar as corruption is concerned? The president never used this language the first few months when he got into power. The president never used that language when he was in opposition. Why has the language changed? It's very sad. I saw those comments.
But is it true that you cannot sort out a systematic, and a legacy issue like corruption, especially, in the public service, within just under 3 years?
First of all, as a leader,
you're on record of stating that when the president has failed, it's good that he should come out and say, look, I failed on this, and I'm doing this to ensure that I don't fail. He's come out and said, look, it's not easy to root out this corruption just under 3 years.
So here are the practical steps the president can take. First of all, the president must declare his assets and give a new direction to the fight against corruption. From the moral point of view, cause his ministers to declare their assets. Because remember, he's putting on this fight. He's giving an impression that he's putting on, he's championing the fight against corruption. Secondly, deal with all constitutional office holders who are facing corruption charges. Deal with his ministers who are facing corruption charges. Ensure that the SEC is independent. That way, he will not again be telling us that this corruption is systematic. You see, to say what the president said when he knew that the Anti-Corruption Commission was impotent. The board of the SEC is there with competent men and women, and he puts a compromised management team. He should not be the same one. The president can't be the same one, turning around and say, no, you can't fight this. It's systematic. What does he mean? If he genuinely wants to fight corruption, let him ensure that SEC is independent. The president must also ensure that it does not protect any ministers or any constitutional office holders. Whatever has been revealed during the last few days was known to the president. I know that because we debated these matters on the floor of the House several times. The issue of drugs from Egypt was heavily debated on the floor of the House. So we are looking at the issue of drugs at the tail end. There's actually the issue of procurement, how the drugs were procured. The reaction has come because the containers have been marooned at some yard. But we raised issues about how those drugs were procured. Was there a tender? How was that procurement done? When you interrogate the process through which those drugs were procured, then you realize that we actually have a much bigger problem than the situation that we found the containers in. So the president must be sincere. The president must be sincere. The buck stops at him. His government is highly corrupt. There is grand corruption in the Upnd government. When Fred Membe, president of the Socialist Party, once said, if PF were thieves, they were stealing change, the Upnd are actually stealing capital. And many people laughed. The figures don't lie. It's 13 billion now, unusual transactions. It was 5.3 billion last year, unusual transactions. And many people may not really relate easily to these figures. To give you an idea, 30 million kwacha per constituency in terms of CDF times 156 constituencies gives us about 4.6 billion. Are we together? I want you to understand how much money is involved here. The money that was reported in the 2022 report alone was enough to fund CDF plus. So meaning that if these criminals who are busy transferring this money did not transfer that money, the government could actually give up to 60 million kwacha CDF per constituency. You have 5.3 plus 13 point, that's 19 billion. 19 billion can cover 5 years of CDF, so to speak.
Amidst these issues that you're talking about, Honorable Brand Mundubile, issues around grand corruption happening in the Upnd, issues around how unprecedented the cost of living has gone high, the Upnd still enjoy the majority support across the country, and this is evidenced by the by-elections that they continuously keep winning. Whilst you as the Patriotic Front still remain fragmented and still are losing these by-elections, they still enjoy the support.
I know that you, on a lighter note, you also watch TV a lot. Do you remember Mr. Bean? You remember Mr. Bean? Mr. Bean once bought 100 Christmas cards and signed them to himself and put them in his mailbox. And he was opening one after the other. He was very happy that he was so loved. So if you talk about today's by-elections, the Upnd are competing against themselves. They're competing against themselves.
What do you mean when all these political parties that are competing?
PF is a major political party. And we all know what they've tried to do to the PF. Of course, we're busy trying to resolve these matters. I don't think that they would have had any honeymoon if the party was left to function normally, as it were. Yeah.
Well, you want to get back into government. You want the Patriotic Front to get back into government and be the ones to preside over the affairs of this country. But one would tend to ask, Honorable Mundubile, what is it that you want to do that you didn't do in the past 10 years that the Zambian people gave you an opportunity to do as a Patriotic Front-led government?
Yes, maybe I'll start by telling you about what we did and where we left things and where we would want to take things. What didn't happen to this country for many, many, many years was that we left it at a potential level. What you'd hear people say all the time, oh, there's a lot of potential in tourism. Oh, there's a lot of potential in agriculture. Oh, there's a lot of potential in this and that. So what President Saturn, President Edgar Chagwa Lungu did, they took a bold stand. They took a bold stand by creating backbone infrastructure that would open up the country. You remember that our strategy was the open up strategy. And this was through an integrated multi-sector approach. What does that mean? We began to open up roads countrywide, communication towers countrywide, power lines countrywide. This is in a bid to industrialize. For us to grow this economy, we have to industrialize. And to be able to industrialize, we've got to invest. Investment has happened, in part. You know that you are going to find power lines in Kaputa, communication towers as it were. So what is required now is real investments in areas of tourism, in areas of agriculture. So to answer your question, the backbone infrastructure that we created now has to start bearing fruit and begin to pay back against that investment. So when we come back into power, we are going to focus on areas like tourism. There's a lot of potential on tourism. That is the reason why we have these 3 big airports that were constructed. The next step is begin to build airdromes in areas where there are tourism assets, as it were. We had created a farming block in every province and began to invest power lines, communication towers, and of course roads in some cases. So the backbone infrastructure for the country is done. And unfortunately, our friends in the Upnd have not been able to take advantage of that, to be able to build upon that. If you see their budgets are mainly on social safety nets, as it were. They have not really looked at how Zambia can realize the potential that lies in it. So we are in a hurry to come back to complete the journey that we started.
As we conclude, the president has been on record stating that it's so funny why the Patriotic Front wants to come back into office, because number one, they left a mountain of debt that is unsustainable. They destroyed an economy. Actually, he says that there's no economy at the time that they got into office, that there was no economy to even talk about because you ran down the economy. He describes you as a bunch of criminals that came to run down the government. And that is a picture that is painted.
First of all, like the Honorable Member for Nakonde said on the floor of the House, they called us criminals, plunderers, thieves, when the FIC report was at 2 billion. I don't know what we should call them now that the FIC report is at 18 billion. We were called thieves when the suspicious transactions are 2 billion. The transactions are now at 13. So I'll leave it up to the Zambian people to coin some name for our friends who are in government today. The president makes a lot of statements, but between you and I, we know that a number of things the president said in the past and continues to say turn out not to be true. It has become very difficult for the Zambian people to believe the president, because almost anything that he says is different from what he said yesterday. So he may not be in the habit of telling the truth. So even as you listen to him, even as you hear him say things, take it with a pinch of salt. Look, I'll tell you something. They've been in government for 3 years now. They are talking about a mountain of debt. The only achievement that the president posts is employment of 30,000 teachers and 11,000 nurses. Now, I'll ask you one question. Do you know that the schools that have employed the 30,000 people came from the same date that he keeps talking about? Do you know that the hospitals that are hosting the 11,000 nurses come from the same date that he is talking about? The trade between countries, the Kazungula Bridge, comes from the same date that he's talking about. The electricity that he's exporting to other countries today was because we borrowed $3 billion to invest in power generation. So, on one hand, he's enjoying the fruits of that debt. On the other hand, he wants to paint the PF black as if they borrowed without thinking. Their flagship projects, their achievements are in the health sector, in the education sector. They are riding on the same debt that he's talking about. You see, parliamentarians are all aware. We approved the budget in that house. It was very clear that the budget, when statutory payments are made, there was only 10% of the budget left for infrastructure development. We were going to take forever to build this country had we been relying on the budgetary allocations. I'll give you an example as we wind up. Your salary is 10,000 kwacha. You are using up to 9,000 kwacha, rentals, fees, and you only rescue 1,000 kwacha. If you aim to spend $1 million on building a house, how long would that take you? So it's simple reasoning even at household level. We go to the bank and borrow. The rentals are converted into loan repayment, as it were. Maybe as I borrow that 1 million, I'll do a semi-detached. Part of the house to be rented. That's how people survived. So there's nothing wrong with borrowing. What is wrong is if you borrow for consumption like they're doing now. Do you know that they're borrowing heavily? And there's nothing for them to show. Not one single project. There's not one project under the Upnd, despite having borrowed so much. They've borrowed so much money in the 3 years that I've been, both on the foreign and domestic markets. The businesses are crumbling today because they're unable to borrow from the banks. The private sector has been crowded out of the market because government is borrowing heavily from the domestic markets.
The Minister of Finance argues that they haven't overborrowed.
No, they've borrowed highly. I mean, we approve that borrowing in Parliament, so we know. Remember that both Minister Msokotwane and President Hakainde Hichilema said that there was no room for borrowing. They said there was no room for borrowing. He was being interviewed by Costa. He told Costa, look, there's just no room. We have to change the paradigm. There has to be a paradigm shift. You know, there's no room for borrowing. Even if we wanted to borrow, there's no room for borrowing. But they found some room. They blew off the roof and they started borrowing. But the concern that I have is that with that borrowing is mainly for consumption. We remain proud and stand tall because what we use, the money that we borrowed, is all for O2C. President HH right now is exporting power to Botswana. He's exporting power to Namibia and Congo. Why? Because we borrowed and invested in increased power generation. He has employed 30,000 teachers because we borrowed and built more schools. He's employed 11,000 nurses because we borrowed and built clinics.
Now, Brand Mundubile, thank you so much for speaking with me on this day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.